Women often get addicted to men without realizing it. Emotional dependency, fear of being alone, and seeking validation trap them. They romanticize flaws, ignore red flags, and lose themselves in the process. True freedom comes when a woman reconnects with her worth, her dreams, and her own power. Emotional dependency is a silent force that can quietly take over a woman's life, often without her even realizing it. It starts subtly, with small gestures of care and attention that feel comforting, like a warm light in an otherwise cold world. At first, it seems harmless, even beautiful, wanting to feel close to someone, seeking their presence, enjoying their words. But slowly, it can grow into something much deeper, much more consuming. Emotional dependency is when a woman begins to rely on a man not just for companionship, but for validation, happiness, and even a sense of self. She starts measuring her worth by the way he looks at her, the way he responds, the words he chooses. Each message, each call, each small sign of attention becomes a lifeline, a measure of her value. When a woman becomes emotionally dependent, her life starts revolving around another person's moods, choices, and priorities. She may find herself constantly waiting for approval, seeking reassurance that she is loved, wanted, or appreciated. Decisions that once belonged to her alone are now influenced by his reactions. She may suppress her desires, her opinions, and her voice just to avoid conflict or gain favor. Over time, this creates an imbalance, a subtle surrender of independence that feels almost natural because it's woven with love and care. But love should never feel like a cage. Emotional dependency turns care into control, attention into necessity, and affection into an addiction. The danger lies not in love itself, but in the blurring of boundaries. Emotional dependency makes it hard to distinguish between genuine affection and the need to feel safe, needed, or validated. A woman may tolerate behavior that disrespects her, diminishes her, or hurts her, all because the thought of losing that emotional connection feels unbearable. Her happiness becomes conditional, tied to another person's actions, and her inner peace becomes fragile, swaying with every smile, every word, every glance. She may even start rationalizing mistakes or excusing behavior that chips away at her self-esteem because the thought of losing him feels worse than staying in discomfort or pain. Breaking free from emotional dependency is not easy because it is often deeply rooted in fears and insecurities. It requires self-awareness, courage, and the realization that love should never demand the loss of oneself. True strength comes when a woman learns to value her own presence, to nurture her own soul, and to find completeness within herself. Emotional independence does not mean rejecting love. It means choosing love consciously without needing it to validate one's worth. It means enjoying a relationship as a choice, not as a necessity. Only when a woman reconnects with her own identity, her dreams, and her passions can she truly experience love without dependency, with freedom, dignity, and authenticity. Fear of being alone is one of the most powerful forces that silently shapes a woman's choices, often pushing her into relationships that do not serve her, or keeping her trapped in connections that drain her soul. It is not simply a dislike of solitude, it runs much deeper than that. It is a fear rooted in the belief that being alone equates to being unloved, unworthy, or incomplete. From the outside, it might look like dependency or clinginess, but inside, it is a quiet, relentless voice whispering that she cannot survive without someone else's presence, approval, or affection. This fear often begins in subtle ways, shaped by early experiences and societal expectations. From a young age, Women are taught that they need someone to complete them, that love defines their value, and that being single is a failure. These messages plant seeds of insecurity, seeds that grow quietly over the years. When a woman internalizes the idea that solitude is dangerous, she begins to equate her self-worth with the presence of another person. The moment she is alone, anxiety creeps in. Loneliness becomes a threat rather than an opportunity, a danger rather than a gift. She fears emptiness, silence, and the chance to confront her own thoughts. In relationships, this fear often manifests as dependency, compromise, or self-suppression. A woman may tolerate disrespect, ignore red flags, or give more than she receives, all to avoid the possibility of being left alone. She may cling to a man who does not value her because the thought of stepping away, even for her own well-being, feels unbearable. The fear of solitude creates a cycle of seeking constant reassurance, validation, and attention, often at the cost of her own happiness and identity. In extreme cases, she may even sacrifice her dreams, passions, or personal growth to maintain the illusion of security, thinking that a relationship, any relationship, is better than facing herself. The irony is that this fear of being alone actually blocks the very love and freedom she seeks. Love cannot thrive in fear. It cannot grow when it is rooted in neediness or insecurity. True empowerment comes when a woman learns to embrace her own company, to find joy in solitude, and to understand that being alone does not make her less valuable. Solitude becomes a teacher, a space for reflection, self-discovery, and healing. It allows her to rebuild her sense of self, recognize her worth, and cultivate inner strength. When a woman overcomes the fear of being alone, she stops settling for less than she deserves. She begins to enter relationships from a place of choice rather than desperation, from strength rather than fear. She understands that companionship is a bonus, not a necessity, and that her completeness is never dependent on another person. Freedom from this fear allows her to love fully, without compromise, without losing herself, and without the chains of insecurity holding her back. Solitude is no longer a threat. It becomes the foundation of her power, dignity, and authentic happiness. Romanticizing imperfection is one of the most common ways women unknowingly get addicted to men, convincing themselves that flaws are lovable or that they alone have the power to fix him. At first, it feels noble, even heroic, the idea that love can transform someone, that patience and care can smooth out rough edges, heal wounds, or bring out the best in a person. But over time, this mindset can become a trap, blurring the line between love and self-sacrifice, admiration and obsession. Women begin to see potential as reality, hope as guarantee, and promises as absolutes. They attach themselves not to the person who is present, but to the person they imagine him to be. When a woman romanticizes imperfection, she often tolerates behavior that she would never accept in anyone else. She excuses lies, rationalizes disrespect, and overlooks neglect, all in the name of love. She tells herself that he is struggling, that he is not ready, or that his flaws are temporary, believing that her devotion will ultimately change the outcome. Every broken promise, every hurtful word, every sign of disregard is softened in her mind by the possibility of transformation. She convinces herself that if she just loves harder, stays longer, or gives more, the man she wants will emerge from the one she sees today. This romanticization becomes addictive because it creates a cycle of hope and disappointment. Emotional highs occur when he shows affection, interest, or vulnerability, reinforcing the belief that the potential is real. Emotional lows follow when he fails to meet expectations, yet the hope for change keeps her tethered. Like chasing a mirage, she moves between elation and despair, never fully satisfied, yet unwilling to let go. In this cycle, imperfection is no longer a neutral quality. It becomes a source of emotional dependency. The very flaws that might signal incompatibility or danger are transformed into reasons to stay, proof that her love is needed, and validation of her own significance. The danger of romanticizing imperfection is that it distracts a woman from seeing the truth about herself and the relationship. While she focuses on changing him, she may neglect her own growth, desires, and boundaries. She may compromise her values, silence her needs, and diminish her self-worth, believing that endurance and patience are marks of strength. Yet true strength lies not in enduring the unacceptable, but in recognizing what she deserves and refusing to settle for less. Love should elevate, inspire, and support, not drain, confuse, or diminish. Breaking free from this pattern requires awareness and courage. A woman must learn to distinguish between potential and reality, hope and illusion, care and compromise. She must honor herself enough to refuse a relationship that consistently disrespects, disappoints, or harms her, and to seek connection with someone whose presence adds value rather than pain. Romanticizing imperfection may feel like love, but it is often addiction in disguise. True love respects boundaries, embraces reality, and celebrates mutual growth, not unfulfilled dreams or imagined possibilities. Only when a woman stops glorifying flaws does she gain the clarity to love wisely, freely, and fully without losing herself in someone else's imperfections. When a woman's self-worth becomes tied to a man's approval, she unknowingly surrenders her power, her confidence, and her peace. This is one of the most dangerous forms of emotional addiction because it disguises itself as love or devotion. At first, it can seem harmless, a desire to be appreciated, to feel noticed, to matter in someone else's eyes. But over time, dependence on validation turns into a silent prison where every thought, action, and feeling is filtered through the lens of what he thinks, wants, or approves. Happiness becomes conditional, and self-esteem becomes fragile, fluctuating with his moods, his words, and his attention. When a woman measures her worth through a man's approval, she begins to shape herself according to his expectations rather than her own values. She may suppress her opinions, hide her ambitions, or even change her behavior to gain favor. Every compliment becomes a lifeline, every critique a wound. She starts seeking external validation instead of nurturing internal confidence, relying on fleeting moments of acknowledgement to feel complete. The danger lies in the illusion that approval equals love and that love equals worthiness. This illusion traps her in a cycle where she constantly gives, adapts, and sacrifices, all to maintain a sense of value that should have been inherent. This pattern also blurs boundaries, making it difficult to recognize toxic behavior or disrespect. A woman who ties her self-worth to approval may stay in relationships that diminish her, tolerate neglect, or excuse harmful patterns, believing that disapproval or absence means she is unlovable. In doing so, she begins to define herself not by her own standards or accomplishments, but by someone else's perception of her. Her identity becomes entwined with his approval, leaving her vulnerable, anxious, and dependent. She may feel incomplete when he is distant, anxious when he is critical, and desperate when she does not receive the recognition she craves. Breaking free from this mindset requires profound self-awareness and courage. A woman must learn to separate love from approval, to recognize that her value is not conditional, and to anchor her self-worth in herself rather than in someone else's validation. True empowerment begins when she acknowledges that no one else has the power to define her, and that seeking constant approval is not love. It is dependency disguised as affection. By reconnecting with her own goals, her strengths, and her intrinsic worth, she develops confidence that is unshakable, grounded in reality rather than in fleeting attention. When a woman stops tying her value to a man's approval, she begins to experience relationships differently. She can love freely, without fear, without compromise, and without sacrificing her identity. She can engage with people as equals, knowing that her worth exists independently of their recognition. This shift transforms not only her relationships, but her entire life. Approval becomes optional rather than necessary, and happiness becomes self-sustained rather than borrowed. Only when a woman understands that she is complete in herself can she truly engage in love without addiction, fear, or compromise, embracing relationships that respect her, uplift her, and celebrate her authentic self. Past emotional patterns have a way of silently shaping the way a woman experiences love, often without her even realizing it. Early experiences, childhood wounds, and formative relationships create emotional blueprints that influence her choices, desires, and reactions. If a woman grew up in an environment of inconsistency, neglect, or conditional love, she may carry the belief that affection is something to earn, that attention must be chased, and that love is never fully guaranteed. These patterns can make her more prone to seeking approval, tolerating disrespect, or becoming addicted to relationships that mirror the unresolved pain of her past. Emotional patterns from the past act like invisible magnets, drawing her to familiar dynamics even when they are unhealthy. She may find herself repeating cycles of heartbreak, disappointment, or neglect because these experiences feel strangely familiar, almost safe in their predictability. A woman might unconsciously gravitate toward men who mirror the behavior of figures from her past, parents, siblings, or early caregivers, because her mind equates repetition with comfort, even if the comfort is laced with pain. This is why a woman can stay in a relationship that diminishes her or tolerate emotional ups and downs. She has been conditioned to accept turbulence as normal. Past emotional patterns also distort perception. A woman who has been hurt, abandoned, or betrayed may develop an intense fear of rejection, leading her to cling harder, forgive too easily, or rationalize behavior that should be unacceptable. Conversely, she may avoid intimacy altogether, shutting herself off from connection to protect against old wounds. Both extremes, clinginess or detachment, are rooted in the emotional templates formed long ago. She is not weak, but she is carrying unseen baggage, allowing past pain to dictate present choices, and unknowingly inviting the same struggles she has faced before. Breaking free from these patterns requires awareness and intentionality. A woman must first recognize how her past has shaped her reactions and expectations. She must identify the unconscious tendencies that cause her to repeat cycles of pain or dependency. This self-awareness is a form of liberation. It allows her to see clearly when she is being drawn into unhealthy dynamics and when she is acting out old fears rather than present realities. Understanding these patterns does not mean blaming the past or holding on to resentment. It means reclaiming control over the present. Healing past emotional patterns also requires self-compassion. A woman must forgive herself for choices made under old conditioning, knowing that she acted with the tools she had at the time. She must nurture her inner child, validate her own feelings, and create new emotional experiences that rewrite the old blueprint. When a woman consciously replaces fear, insecurity, and dependency with self-love, boundaries, and clarity, she transforms her approach to relationships. She begins to attract connections that are healthy, fulfilling, and based on mutual respect rather than unconscious repetition. Only when a woman confronts and heals her past emotional patterns can she break the cycle of addiction, dependency, and emotional turmoil. She can engage in love with freedom, confidence, and authenticity, choosing relationships that enhance her life rather than replaying unresolved pain. Awareness of the past becomes the key to empowerment, self-respect, and the ability to love without losing herself. The thrill of chase and drama is one of the most addictive forces in a woman's emotional life, often disguised as passion, excitement, or intensity. At first, it feels intoxicating, the uncertainty, the highs and lows, the moments of attention and withdrawal. A woman may find herself drawn to a man not just for who he is, but for the emotional roller coaster he creates. The chase becomes thrilling, almost like a game, where every small victory, a text, a smile, a glance, triggers excitement, dopamine, and a sense of accomplishment. The unpredictability keeps her hooked, making her feel alive, desired, and intensely involved. Drama often follows chase, forming a cycle that feeds emotional dependency. Conflict, misunderstandings, and emotional turbulence create strong emotional spikes that mimic the highs and lows of addiction. A woman may rationalize the chaos as passionate love, believing that the intensity is proof of deep connection. Every argument, reconciliation, and emotional tug of war strengthens the bond in its own strange way, making it harder to step back or detach. She begins to crave the highs and endure the lows, mistaking instability for depth, volatility for affection. Over time, the cycle becomes habitual, and what once felt exciting becomes a psychological pattern that she unconsciously seeks in every relationship. The thrill of chase and drama often masks deeper emotional needs. Many women are drawn to the uncertainty because it triggers a sense of importance, significance, and control. The chase allows them to feel desired, needed, or pursued, and the drama allows them to test loyalty, love, and resilience. Yet both are illusions. While the excitement is real, it often comes at the cost of peace, self-respect, and emotional stability. Women may stay in situations that undermine their dignity, tolerate manipulation, or justify behavior that is harmful, all because the highs of attention feel worth the lows of neglect. This pattern becomes addictive because of the emotional chemistry involved. The human brain is wired to respond to reward and anticipation. Every act of pursuit, every gesture of attention releases chemicals that create temporary pleasure and reinforce attachment. Drama amplifies this effect by creating emotional extremes that feel intense and memorable. Over time, the mind and heart begin to associate love with unpredictability and intensity rather than consistency and respect, making calm, healthy relationships feel less stimulating or even boring in comparison. Breaking free from the lure of chase and drama requires awareness, self-control, and emotional maturity. A woman must learn to distinguish between excitement and instability, passion and chaos. She must recognize that real love does not require constant testing, conflict, or games. It thrives in mutual respect, trust, and consistency. By choosing clarity over confusion, peace over volatility, and self-respect over temporary thrills, she can cultivate relationships that are emotionally fulfilling rather than addictive. Understanding the psychology behind the chase and drama allows a woman to reclaim her power, redirect her energy, and invest in connections that nurture her rather than deplete her. Only when a woman steps out of the cycle of chase and drama can she experience love in its true form, steady, respectful, and empowering. She learns to find excitement in life itself, in her own passions and purpose, rather than in emotional turbulence, freeing herself from addiction to chaos and reclaiming her emotional freedom. Ignoring red flags is one of the most common ways women become emotionally addicted to men, often convincing themselves that what they see is not reality or that love will change everything. At first, red flags are small, a harsh word, a moment of neglect, a broken promise, but they gradually accumulate like cracks in a foundation. Many women rationalize these signs, telling themselves that he didn't mean it, that he's under stress, or that it's just a phase. They romanticize flaws, prioritize hope over truth, and cling to the idea that their love can somehow make the situation better. The danger of ignoring red flags lies in the pattern it creates. Every time a woman overlooks a warning sign, she reinforces a cycle of tolerance, compromise, and self-sacrifice. She begins to accept behavior that undermines her confidence, disrespects her boundaries, or diminishes her happiness. Each ignored red flag becomes a quiet message to herself that her needs, feelings, and dignity are secondary. Over time, this erosion of self-respect can make her more vulnerable to emotional dependency because she starts believing that her worth is tied to the persistence of the relationship rather than her own integrity. Women often ignore red flags out of fear of being alone, fear of losing someone they love, or fear of confronting uncomfortable truths. They may cling to hope, thinking that tomorrow will be different or that love requires patience and endurance. Yet love should never come at the expense of self-respect. Ignoring red flags is not a sign of strength or commitment. It is a form of self-deception, a way of avoiding the pain of reality while secretly training the heart to accept less than it deserves. The more this pattern continues, the more a woman risks becoming entangled in emotional chaos, where boundaries blur and dependency deepens. Another reason women overlook red flags is the allure of potential. They see the man they wish he could be rather than the man he is. They believe that flaws are temporary, that change is imminent, or that their love alone can rewrite his behavior. While hope can be inspiring, when it overrides reality, it becomes dangerous. Red flags are not obstacles to be overcome. They are signals, guiding women to recognize incompatibility, disrespect, or harm before it escalates. Ignoring them leads not to transformation, but to prolonged disappointment, frustration, and emotional entrapment. Breaking free from the habit of ignoring red flags requires courage, self-awareness, and honesty. A woman must learn to recognize early warning signs, trust her instincts, and prioritize her well-being above all else. Love should feel safe, nurturing, and reciprocal, not draining, confusing, or conditional. By acknowledging red flags, she empowers herself to make conscious choices, set boundaries, and step away from relationships that compromise her integrity. Recognizing and acting on red flags is an act of self-respect, a declaration that she values herself enough to refuse patterns of emotional harm. When a woman stops ignoring red flags, she reclaims control over her heart and her life. She learns that love does not require compromise of values or dignity, and that healthy relationships are built on respect, honesty, and mutual care. Awareness transforms dependency into empowerment, hope into clarity, and attraction into genuine connection. By facing reality rather than ignoring it, a woman frees herself from addiction to toxic cycles and steps into a life of emotional strength, freedom, and authentic love. Loss of personal identity is one of the most dangerous consequences of emotional addiction in relationships. When a woman becomes overly attached to a man, she can gradually lose touch with who she truly is, her dreams, her values, her passions, and even her voice. At first, it may seem like compromise, sharing time, energy, and attention for the sake of love. But slowly, this compromise becomes a pattern where she prioritizes his needs, desires, and expectations above her own. She begins to define herself through the lens of the relationship, asking less of herself and more of herself only in ways that please him. This loss often begins subtly. She may start adjusting her opinions, suppressing her feelings, or abandoning hobbies and goals that once brought her joy, all to maintain harmony or gain approval. Over time, the reflection of herself she sees in his eyes becomes more important than the reality of who she is. Her identity becomes entwined with the relationship, and she forgets that she has intrinsic value outside of another person's attention. The woman who once had dreams, ambitions, and passions now exists in fragments, defined by the expectations, moods, and presence of a man. The consequences of losing one's identity and love are profound. When self-worth is tied to another person, happiness becomes conditional, and insecurity becomes a constant companion. She may feel anxious, unfulfilled, or invisible, even while being physically close to someone she loves. Boundaries erode, self-respect diminishes, and the relationship, instead of being a source of growth and support, becomes a cage. She may tolerate neglect, manipulation, or emotional harm simply because the thought of reclaiming herself feels frightening or lonely. In extreme cases, women may lose not just parts of their identity, but the ability to recognize their own needs, desires, and limits, living life on autopilot in service of someone else. Reclaiming personal identity requires courage, self-awareness, and intentional effort. A woman must reconnect with her passions, her values, and her individuality, even if it challenges the dynamics of her relationship. She must learn to prioritize her own growth, cultivate her own happiness, and understand that her existence is complete on its own. Love should complement a life, not consume it. True emotional freedom begins when a woman realizes that being complete in herself allows her to engage in relationships from a place of choice, power, and authenticity rather than fear, dependency, or obligation. Restoring identity also means setting boundaries, saying no without guilt, and refusing to compromise self-worth for temporary comfort or approval. It means remembering who she was before she became emotionally entangled and intentionally rebuilding a life that reflects her true essence. The moment a woman steps into her own power, she experiences a clarity that cannot be shaken by another's approval or attention. Relationships become healthier, deeper, and more fulfilling when she loves not out of necessity or addiction, but from a place of wholeness and authenticity. When a woman reclaims her identity, she not only frees herself from emotional addiction, but she also attracts love that respects and uplifts her true self. Her happiness no longer depends on anyone else. It comes from within. Independence, clarity, and self-respect replace insecurity, fear, and dependence, creating a foundation for relationships that honor her fully and a life that reflects her authentic, empowered self. At the heart of every pattern, every dependency, and every compromise lies one undeniable truth. A woman's worth is never defined by another person. Emotional addiction, fear, compromise, and the lure of drama can cloud her vision, but they cannot diminish her value. The journey toward freedom begins with awareness, recognizing the ways she has surrendered her power, lost herself in another, or allowed hope and fear to dictate her choices. True liberation comes when she reconnects with her identity, honors her boundaries, and finds fulfillment within herself. A woman who understands her worth no longer chases validation, tolerates disrespect, or sacrifices her peace for temporary affection. She loves consciously, chooses wisely, and engages in relationships that elevate her rather than deplete her. Every past pattern, every fear, and every mistake becomes a teacher, guiding her towards self-respect, clarity, and empowerment. In the end, breaking free from emotional addiction is not about rejecting love. It is about embracing it from a place of strength, authenticity, and wholeness. When a woman loves herself first, she transforms not only her relationships, but her life, creating space for love that is nurturing, mutual, and true.